I'd like to welcome to Rebel HQ Martin Gurri, author of The Revolt of the Public and the blog The Fifth Wave. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to hawk my book on your audience.
Well, as you are probably alluding to, there is a new edition of the book released by Stripe Press November 13th. Very excited to talk to you about a number of different tidbits, both from the blog and from the book. But overall, for people who might not be familiar with the book, what is the overarching theme of it?
Well, basically the Revolt of the Public is the story of a conflict between information wielded by ordinary people and power as represented by the elites that run the great institutions that we've inherited from the industrial age. In this strange, shadowy conflict, it's difficult to tell who's winning or even whether either side can win. But it's pretty easy to tell who's losing, and it's those institutions, and they include, of course, democratic politics and democratic government. I can go into it a little bit more if you want. In fact, I could probably speak on my entire 11 minutes and then some. But how much more detail do you want?
Well, there's a couple different case studies that I know that you get into in your book that I want to turn to in a minute. But if you could just give an example of, we have this new rise of technology and information, a flood of information. I think you describe it as a digital tsunami. Yes. You talk there about the potentially negative effect in some ways on political institutions. What are just a couple of quick examples of how technology has negatively impacted these longstanding institutions?
Well, I mean, I would take a step back and say the volume of information can't help but just smash at institutions that have been used from the start as working from the industrial model to controlling a kind of a semi-monopoly of information in their own domain. Suddenly that information is lost from their grasp, and authority leaks away as this has happened. I mean, look around. Every institution we have inherited from the industrial age is in crisis. The elites who run those institutions are distrusted and despised. Think about the time that John F. Kennedy's day, you could take a survey of trust in government, you could get 70, 80% of people saying they trusted government. Today it's 20 to 30%, and if you talk about Congress, it's in the teens. So, and this isn't just about government, it's all the institutions. News media, for example, is also below 30% in trust. The days when a journalist, an anchorman, could be voted the most trusted person in America, those days are long gone. So, what happened? What changed? There's one obvious change. Since JFK's time to ours, the amount of information available to an ordinary person has multiplied to infinity.
Yeah.
From the days of the cave paintings to, say, the year 2000, information grew in a very stately and gradual manner. Then something went crazy. If you look at the year 2002, the amount of information created that year doubled all of previous history. 2003 doubled all of 2002. That trend has continued. If you chart that trend, you get that look of a stupendous wave, a tsunami.
Yeah.
I have that chart in the book. I urge everyone to go buy the book only if you want to look at, if you stare at that chart hard enough. If you look at it, you will find in it everything that follows. The revolts, the repudiations, the disintegrations, even, I suspect, Donald Trump. You can't look at this chart with this immense spike of information and not think, how can institutions that are based on the old industrial model survive a battering from this monster? And I mean, you look at what has happened to the news media and how essentially the newspapers have unbundled, and you look at what's happening in government, it also seems to be unbundling in the strangest way. This is a factor of institutions that have lost their grip on the information that they used to basically stand on for their authority.
So you brought up a couple of different examples there that I do want to return to, but I want to start with us here in the media. So we are now fake news. Truth doesn't exist. We've moved past truth. So I want to talk about this from the point of view of your book. So we have this explosion of digital devices and available information. How does that lead to people turning against the news, either traditional forms of the news or even potentially online news as well?
Well, in the olden days, and despite my youthful good looks, those were the days of my early life. You would read a newspaper and you would get a story, or you would watch TV at 7 p.m. when they all had their news, and you would get a story. And you had no way to contradict what these sources told you. More or less, they all reported on the same very narrow band of subjects. They all more or less had the same narrow band of opinions. There was some backing and forth thing if you were a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative. But mostly it was in a very limited field of play, and it was dominated by the people who owned the information. And that was your field, journalism. Or, for example, if you were in government, it was the White House could stamp something top secret and say, this is what it's based, my actions are based on. Mm-hmm. Today, all that is gone. I mean, it's just simply gone. There are, for every piece of information that says one thing, I can find you 100 that say the opposite or different. Who do you believe and why becomes almost a factor of personal preference. We're in a crisis of authority, and a crisis of authority, I think, can't help but trigger a crisis of uncertainty. I mean, reality is what it is, right? But the job of mediating between faraway reality and the public, of giving kind of like the flux of events some meaning, that's always been the highest calling of the elites. They were the authorities. So, for example, Pearl Harbor was a day of infamy, and not a day basically that the U.S. got caught with its pants down in the Pacific. 9/11 happened because the perpetrators hated our freedom, not necessarily because they were angry out of foreign policy. Events have to be mediated and explained. Those who do the explaining used to have the public's trust. But today, I think that trust has been destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. The mediator class of journalists, to which you belong, politicians, academics, all that is gone with the wind. So reality, in a sense, it's up for grabs. I hope that everybody's clear that I'm not talking about Vladimir Putin and Russian influence. That's one aspect of this. Did the Russians actually try to influence the 2016 elections through fake news? That's almost certainly true. Did they actually influence the election is a much more interesting question. I have seen no evidence to suggest that they have. Mm-hmm. I think the matter goes a lot deeper than Russians on Facebook. A nation of 320 million needs shared sources of meaning and shared sources to interpret reality. Our democracy obviously has to argue from a common set of facts. But those who used to settle factual disputes, people like yourselves, mm-hmm. have lost all credibility. They are perceived as fakers themselves. So the truth, in a way, has begun to unbundle. And as you know, this is a familiar trajectory for the digital universe. Everything unbundles and personalizes. Newspapers unbundle into stories. Old music albums unbundle into personalized playlists. We now have, information playlists and highly personalized ideas about truth.
Yeah. So that's dark, and it makes me worried in a number of different areas. We only have one more minute, but is there anything that you, when you're looking out there, the technology we have, the way things are changing, any cause for optimism that in some way that this might either be reversed or that technology could help to fix some of the problems technology has caused?
Absolutely. I think it is completely reversible. I have always been a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. I think if you look at the little country of Estonia, they have managed to basically digitize much of government. I think part of the clash today is between a public that is used to dealing instantaneously with its desires and demands, and a government that's in the old industrial model. It takes months to get anything done when it can get it done. Yeah. Estonia is working in that regard. And I think, honestly, the public can be reconciled to our system the second that the elite class becomes reconciled to this new world we live in of digital information. I personally am pessimistic about the current elite class, but you know what? They can be replaced.
That's true. And in this last election, we saw a little bit of that replacing already going on.
Yep.
Well, Martin Gurri, thank you so much for joining us on the show, author of The Revolt of the Public. Some great examples, if people check it out. You talk about different movements that have been influenced by this flow of information, Brexit, Donald Trump, the rise of fake news, things like that. So very interesting stuff. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, John, for having me on.
Thanks for watching this free clip of Rebel Headquarters. Don't forget to become a TYT member today for more exclusive content. Join now at tyt.com/join.